But anyway, then we get to the best part. The new Midnight Express, Brian. You were waiting on this one, weren't you?
I think everyone was.
I've told this. Yeah, thank you. Am I going on too long?
No, this is fascinating.
All righty.
It's nice to hear things debunked.
It's nice to hear conspiracy theories debunked. So I remember this one exactly where I was because I didn't answer my regular phone that day at my house in Connecticut because I was afeared it might be somebody calling me I didn't want to talk to. But there was a bat phone number that only my mother, my significant other's family at the time, and the office had that rang in the kitchen. And it rang. And I picked it up, and it was Vince McMahon. And I said, oh, this can't be good. That's when he pitched the idea of, well, pal, what about we renew, or have a renewed Midnight Express? What? Well, yeah, because I'd been managing the rock and roll, and I'd been involved in a thing with Wyndham and Jarrett and blah, blah, blah. And I think at that point in time, Severn was on the way. He wasn't quite there yet. Okay. Well, we're thinking about Bob Holly and Bart Gunn. Okay. Bob and Bart, both at that time, were guys, they weren't doing hardly anything with them. They were barely booking. And I liked Bob Holly, especially as a talent. A lot of Smoky Mountain Wrestling fans will remember he was on my first taping, and I did about the first 6 tapings. Bob Holly, before he became the modern Bob Holly that most people know with the buzz cut and jacked up 260 pounds or whatever, and he was a long-haired, 220-pound, classic Southern heel wrestler when he was in his early mid-20s. But he had come along right after the downfall of the territories. He used to come up with Pat Rose to Georgia or to TBS shows in Atlanta and do jobs. And I saw him there, and that's when I was starting to think about Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I said, this guy, he reminded me of Bobby Eaton when he was younger. He could do the elbow off the top. He could do the drop kick off the top. His knee drop and I know people are saying, Bob Holly, what the fuck? He got bigger and older and heavier and changed his style. But when he's in his mid-20s, he was the closest one that to this day that I've ever seen that could do Bobby Eaton's knee drop off the top, similar to Bobby. Nobody's ever duplicated it, but he was very close. So I brought him up and started him as a heel in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Hollywood Bob Holly. But at the time, he lived in Mobile. That was a pretty good drive to come up to Knoxville, even to get on TV and be pushed, because his real job was a welder. And that's when his wife or girlfriend at the time told him he had to make a decision to either wrestle or weld. And he chose welding because that's what he was making money at. But he was also friends with Percy Pringle, Paul Bearer. And after he'd had to pull out of Smoky Mountain, it was probably about a year later that Paul had pitched him to the WWF, and they brought him in because Bob also in his spare times, he did things really good that he couldn't make any money at. Wrestling, race car driving. But one of the things he also did was he wasn't like fucking Dale Earnhardt, but on a local level, he raced cars. So that's another of those things that Vince fixated on and brought him in as the wrestling racer, Thurman Sparky Plug. Remember that? And actually, they fucked that up because I think Thurman Sparky Plug was supposed to be a takeoff on STP, but they reversed the fucking initials.
I think so. I think that's right.
And I got to be honest, I had to fuck with Bob a little bit. When he first got up there, I was glad he had the job. But I was like, see, that's at the time when Smoky Mountain had a relationship with the WWF also. And some of my guys were starting to come up. I said, see, if you'd have stuck with me last year, you'd have to be up here under your real name instead of getting to be called Sparky Plug. He was fucking hot, right? Because he didn't like Sparky Plug. Nobody did. It was fucking stupid. But anyway, then they changed it to Bob Spark Plug Holly and blah, blah, blah. So I liked Bob. And Bart Gunn, the Smoking Guns, the Bodies had a nice string with them. And we'd worked with them with Yoko and Owen. They were good athletes and good young guy. Billy at the time, they were both, in their 20s. So I didn't want to piss on it, the idea of a new Midnight Express, if these guys were going to get a chance. But I knew it was doomed because it's like they didn't learn from the new Diesel and Razor. I said, well, could I manage these guys and give them another team name and I'll manage it? Well, no, we want it because the people know you with the Midnight Express. See, that's the thing. Here's another part about Shitstain's revamping of history. Me and Vince McMahon and Shitstain were never, that I remember, in a car at the same time. We never traveled together because he wasn't on the team when it was me, JR, Bruce, and Vince. And as I've told stories many times before, not only did that foursome break up as far as writing to the TVs because Shitstain came into the creative team, Bruce went into work in the office, JR was more doing announcing, whatever. It was also because on the rare periods that Vince wanted to drive, nobody wanted to ride with him because it scared you to fucking death. JR's quote to him when he quit was, "Vince, I love you, but I'm not going to ride with you anymore because I want to live to see my daughters again." I never was that blatant. I just figured out ways to get around it until that, was no longer an issue. After that time that Vince drove us back from Albany to Stamford when he was mad they rerouted us due to weather and we were 100 miles an hour for 3 hours in a goddamn severe thunderstorm. But anyway, I've told the story before when we would go into convenience stores after the shows, or we'd be in the arenas and the security guards, especially in old Crockett territories, they would see me when I was on television managing the WWF champion Yokozuna or the tag team champions Bulldog and Owen or whatever. They would point at me and still go Midnight Express because that's what they remembered, because wrestling in 93, 94, 95, 96 was not nearly as popular as it was in 1985, 86, 87. And you would get that look on Vince's face, right? You'd see it like, but I wasn't pitching the idea of bringing the Midnight Express in because at the point in time that I was there working in the WWF, only one of them, Bobby Eaton, was still even wrestling. And he was under contract to TBS. So anyway, Vince calls me, new Midnight Express, Bob Holly and Bart Gunn. All right, okay. I actually said, let me call you back, because I called Bobby and I got him at home because they weren't really booking him down there either. And I told him what they wanted to do. And I said, I won't do this if you don't like it. And he said, Corn, the same thing. Well, if they want to use those guys, I don't care. Okay. So I called back and said, all right, Bobby didn't have a problem with it. We'll call them the Midnight Express. Since they've never teamed up before, when should we get them together? So I actually had to suggest that they fly them up to Stamford and go to the ring at the studio so that they could actually work out a couple of tag team moves before they put them on television as a fucking new version of the most accomplished heel tag team of the previous fucking 15 years. And that's what we did with 1 or 2 practice sessions where I just showed them a couple of the Midnight's double team things, but also they just got the feel of each other and how each other reached out for the tag and their timing on spots and shit. And it wasn't like you could manufacture the Fabulous Kangaroos in 2 workout sessions, even with 2 guys that are really good athletes and good workers in their own way. But we found that's what we did with the original Midnight Express, was we found a few moves that each one guy could do that looked good when they did them together as some sort of double team. And we went with that. And I can't believe there was more than a week, I don't think, of pre-notice on this, but if I'm looking at the records right, their big debut, here we go, March 30th in Albany, 1998, Albany, New York. They just fucking showed up as the goddamn new Midnight Express and beat the Headbangers to win the tag team titles of the NWA that weren't over, that nobody'd put any fucking thought into anyway. But they were teasing my taint a little bit. March 31st in Syracuse, that's when Dan Severn debuted. Because obviously I knew where the shit was going with the undercard shit with the headbangers and the rock and roll and the new Midnight Express. It, is giving them a chance to get booked, but I had hopes that they would not fuck up Dan Severn because Shamrock was there. You get Dan Severn in the goddamn same company as Ken Shamrock. A lot of people may not remember 20-something years later. Brian, you can probably give more details than I can, but the two biggest pay-per-view buys of the UFC up to that point in time had been the first two Severn Shamrock fights. Is that pretty much correct?
It sounds correct. I don't know for certain off the top of my head.
And yeah, and I know in dates, and it's been 22 years, but they had two fights, Severn and Shamrock, in the UFC on pay-per-view in the mid-90s. They each won one, and they had each done with, and this was before they had television. This was before The Ultimate Fighter. There was no UFC on broadcast television. People have to remember that point in time. And they had done over 100,000 buys at that point, I think, each, or maybe more than that. I can't remember, but obvious, out of the ordinary buy rates. So when I found out they wanted to bring Dan in, I sent them 10 pages written out of things that Dan Severn shouldn't be asked to do, couldn't do, shouldn't try to do, and conversely in professional wrestling, and all the things that he should do or could do or that you could do with him. You couldn't make him one of the boys. You couldn't make him another wrestler. Dan was never a smooth professional wrestler. Dan got over and could have gotten over better in places if he had been used better as a professional wrestler by capitalizing on the things that he could do, the awards he had won, and the fact that he was real. Dan Severn, as I've mentioned before, was one of the most decorated amateur and professional athletes the United States has ever produced. He was a legitimate all-time superstar in amateur and collegiate-style wrestling around the world. He was a UFC heavyweight champion, UFC super fight champion, the UFC Triple Crown winner. They inducted him later in the Hall of Fame. I figured, okay, we can get something. We can get something here. Dan can back it up. I can fucking talk. And his debut on March 31st in Syracuse on the Raw that aired for April 6th, he was matched with Flash Funk, obviously, Too Cold Scorpio. We worked that match out. I did the guest commentary trying to explain to people who Dan was. He and Scorpio got in the ring. Scorpio knew what fuck was going on. And it was probably the most legitimate thing that people had seen on Raw, legitimate looking thing that people had seen on Raw, and maybe before and afterwards, except the Brawl for All didn't look this legitimate, and it was. Fucking Dan rushed him and fucking snatched him with the belly to belly, rushed him in the ropes and flung him across the ring. Did the thing where he drove him through the ropes. It was a shoot style thing. That was a prototype for the style that Dan should have. Quick, dominant wins, not every week. Talk it up, have Severn or have Shamrock get involved on a personal basis and settle their fucking rivalry before, honestly, people saw that Dan probably wasn't going to wrestle professional style. He was going to do what he did. But you could get that fucking pay-per-view out of it, right? Yeah. They did nothing. So after this initial fucking debut, then they started having Dan work like, one of the boys like everybody else, and it wasn't special anymore. That he never touched Shamrock, I don't think. But anyway, that was hope I had for a little while, and they started doing the other bullshit. But then finally, with the new Heavenly Body thing, the only time that I ever
New Midnight Express.
Or New Midnight Express thing. The only time I ever pitched anything for the New Midnight Express, they were booked in Greenville, South Carolina on April 24th in a house show against a rock and roll on the card. And the place was sold out because WWF hadn't been to Greenville in fucking 10 years, right? Suddenly they're there. And it was the new building. It wasn't the old municipal auditorium. And the people loved the match because they loved seeing the rock and roll in person again. And they liked it was kind of a little nostalgic thing. And then the next day they were in Fayetteville, did almost 10,000 people in a match the same way. The people like seeing the Rock and Roll Express again. So I said, we got to put this thing. I called JR because we were doing a pay-per-view in Greensboro at the Coliseum. April 26, 1998. It was Unforgiven 98. And as a matter of fact, I don't have my book here with the attendance figures and etc., but that was the first time that a wrestling show had drawn more people, and they had jacked the roof up since then on the Greensboro Coliseum. But that was the first time that a wrestling show had outdrawn Starrcade 86 in 1998. And that's when the market rep that did the advertising came into me that day, and he said, you know, we filled it up because the capacity at that point was like 21,000 people. And in the old days, the Starrcade days, it was like 16.6. And he said, they said, this is the biggest wrestling crowd that's been here since then. It's the first time that I think they beat the gate by like 30 or 40 grand or whatever. He said, but do you know how many comp tickets Crockett's people gave away for Starrcade 86? How many free tickets? I said, I got no idea. He said 30. I said, what? They gave away 1,500, 2,000 in the WWF on all the radio stations and sponsors. There were 30 comps out for Starrcade 86. Anyway, I called. I said, put the match on the fucking pay-per-view. Let the people in Greensboro see the Rock and Roll Express. And that's when they did. And we had the match, and they went about 8 minutes. And fucking, we beat them because they couldn't switch the fucking belts because, you know, they didn't want to fucking switch the belts. I don't know. But anyway, that's the only time that I ever suggested that me or anybody else ever be specifically added to a show. And at that point, then, you know, the whole fucking Midnight Express thing was just blah. And that ran, and mostly on the house shows. I mean, there's a few other TV things we did. They did put the new Midnight against Degeneration X at King of the Ring in June that month, so that they could let Degeneration X beat them on the way to the, you know, what were no, it was the WWF Tag Team Champions. Billy Gunn and Road Dogg at that time beat the NWA Tag Team Champions in less than 10 minutes. That's when I had to wait a minute and a half for China to come around and hit me in the nuts. That's, I think, the only pay-per-view match they got ever. It was ridiculous. I mean, you know, you could say that it was just like amateur booking, like the guy at AEW now. He'd never done it before, and he thought this is the way you get people over. But anybody that knew what they were doing or knew what they were looking at said, well, these guys are all being buried specifically. They can't beat anybody but each other in 3 minutes, usually by disqualification, and nobody knows why they're there to begin with. We were fence post turtles. So then finally, the start of the, where was it? The start of the Brawl for All. Here we go. We had a house show in Atlantic City, New Jersey at the old convention center on July 11th, 1998. And even though I didn't have to, I was getting paid. I only really managed the Midnight and all these other guys on television. And sometimes house shows, if they were drivable from the Northeast, I was getting a payoff from the talent pool. So I was going to make the same thing whether I went or not. If I was booked, I went because I was a good, soldier. But I remember I went down to Atlantic City because I had the next day off, and I spent the night, and Dennis Corluzzo and his gang and I went out to eat, right? But I remember also at that show, the Headbangers beat the New Midnight Express in the opening match. And the only person at the headband, that was my gimmick, and I loved those guys too. But the only person, or the only team that the Headbangers could beat was the New Midnight Express. And it gave me flashbacks to when the original Midnight Express had to wrestle the Dynamic Dudes because that was the only team that Herd would let us beat, right? I'm like, this is fucking ridiculous. And I was grumpy anyway. And then I showed up in the Meadowlands on Monday the 13th for Raw. And that was going to be the debut of the Brawl for All. And in the production meeting, I learned that Bob Holly versus Bart Gunn would be in the opening round. And after the production meeting, I went up to Shit Stain and several people sitting at a table. I said, okay, the New Midnight Express is done? Well, no. I said, then they're fighting each other. And he did that shit where he looks at you like everybody is supposed to be able to think like an idiot. And he said, but this is a shoot. What? Well, this is a shoot and there's real money up. So they would fight in this, but then they could still be partners. I said, you blithering fucking idiot. And this is a quote now. I said, you blithering fucking idiot. I said, this is all supposed to be a shoot. And yes, there's prize money, but this $10,000 or whatever it is, if you win each fight, they're the NWA tag team champions. They're trying to be the WWF tag team champions. You mean that's a life-changing amount of money? 10 grand to a professional athlete that he would want to goddamn fucking break up his successful championship tag team. The point is, it's all supposed to be a shoot. You can't have these guys fight each other, especially for real. Because somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and then somebody's going to be grumpy, and then have them go out and be tag team partners. Well, I don't know what to tell you, bro. So I said, I know what to tell y'all. I left that room, and I went in and found Jim Ross, and I said, JR, do you have me managing the new Midnight Express? And JR's told this story before, I think. Do you have me managing the new Midnight Express on any more cards? He said, I think a few. I said, erase that. Erase it. I have officially retired again as a manager. And that's the last time I ever managed in the WWF. In Atlantic City, in the opening match, Headbangers and the new Midnight Express. And of course, they fought that night. And the new Midnight Express was done also, and they never teamed again. But that was the last straw. I had had all I could stands, and I could stands no more, even if my friends were getting jobs and or publicity and or I was trying to be a good employee. That was ridiculous. So, does any of that, Brian, that I just read off for you with dates and places and facts and things sound like anything that I would have done on purpose?
As someone who has seen a lot of Smoky Mountain and OVW, it sounds like bizarro OVW. No, it doesn't sound like anything you would have ever done.
There you go. So, folks, just remember, when you lie, every time you open your mouth, when you habitually lie to try to make your shit legitimate and or excuse the stupid things you've done, two things. Take good notes and never lie about an obsessive record keeper. Because they will take the piss out of you every time, just like I just did. Fuck you, my idea. Fuck you showing somebody that it wouldn't work then. You could have brought goddamn the most famous wrestlers in the world, from Abraham Lincoln to Frank Gotch to fucking Dan Gable, and put them in those situations, and people would have farted in their general direction. And I didn't have nothing to do with it except trying to cooperate. Have you noticed a theme? Every time that I try to be good for somebody else's benefit and cooperate with something because I think it will help somebody else, I end up looking like shit and end up trying to choke somebody anyway.
People will probably laugh, but I've always thought you were too much of a nice guy in certain situations.
Yes, and that's why every time that I eventually end up trying to choke somebody, it's because I have attempted to do a good deed that has been turned against me, and which is why I have totally given up on being cooperative in any instance of anything that I don't want to fucking do, because it always falls in a hole and I get to fucking shit for it. You know, it's enough to drive you just absolutely berserk. I need somebody to talk to. I'll tell you. I talk to you all the time. I guess you're good enough. But folks, if you don't have a Brian Last in your life, if you need somebody to talk to, you can talk to the folks at BetterHelp. BetterHelp, it's not a crisis line. It's professional counseling done securely online. They're available worldwide with a broad range of expertise and a bunch of different counselors. They're hiring new ones all the time to handle the demand. You can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, no waiting rooms, no going out in the pandemic. Or if you're out in the sticks and you don't have help available that's reachable within a legitimate distance away from you, now it's just away from your phone or your computer. And if you go to BetterHelp, and that's better, H-E-L-P, betterhelp.com, you can see the testimonials from the people that have been helped by their service. It's easy to change counselors and find the one that you like. They'll work with you, folks. So go to betterhelp.com/JCE and get 10% off the first month's services. You can join the over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. We've had so much feedback from people that listen to the podcast that have emailed us that this was a service that helped them, especially when they couldn't get out in the world and communicate with other people in case of a lockdown. We're not through this whole thing yet, so we may be locked down again. Anyway, the folks at BetterHelp. Folks, this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/JCE.